Inside the research station, the team found themselves in a maze of half-dissolved corridors and rooms. Acid rain leaked through gaps in the ceiling, creating dangerous pools on the floor. The walls had holes eaten through them by years of chemical assault. Emergency power flickered on and off, making their work harder. The aliens huddled together in areas where their shields could overlap, creating small safe zones. Jake moved freely through the facility, walking through acid puddles and under dripping rain without concern. His boots splashed through corrosive liquid that would have dissolved most materials in minutes. Data storage should be in the central computer room, Jake announced, consulting a map on his wrist display. This way. He led them down a corridor where acid rain fell like a waterfall through a large hole in the ceiling. The aliens had to boost their protection systems to maximum just to survive the passage. Jake walked through the chemical waterfall like it was ordinary water. "Status report," HFY called over the radio. His energy shield was now so unstable it looked like a broken light bulb. "Bioarmor at 40% efficiency," Nelora reported. Parts of her natural carapace were visible through gaps in her failing protection. "I estimate 10 minutes before complete system failure. Containment field holding at 35% power," Wispwind added. His gaseous form was compressed into a tight ball to conserve energy. "External sensors at 60% functionality," Unit 847 announced. "Acid damage to primary optical array. Motor functions unimpaired." Jake reached the computer room and found the door sealed shut. The lock mechanism had been partially dissolved by acid, but it still worked. He connected a small device to the control panel and began working on the security system. "How are you not affected by this environment?" HFY finally asked. His pride had been completely destroyed by watching a human survive in conditions that were killing his advanced protection systems. Jake continued working on the lock while he talked. "You really want to know?" "Yes," all the aliens said at once. "It's not magic," Jake explained as his device cracked the door's security. "It's not some secret human technology. It's something much simpler than that." The lock clicked open and the computer room door slid back. Inside, they found banks of servers and data storage units. Most of the equipment was damaged, but some systems still functioned. Jake moved to the main terminal and began accessing the data files. "You want to know why my armor works in acid rain? Because acid rain is nothing new for humans." He pulled up the mission files on the computer screen while talking. "Earth has been trying to kill humans for millions of years. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and yes, acid rain." Unit 847's damaged sensors focused on Jake. "Elaborate on the acid rain reference." "My planet produces acid rain naturally," Jake said, copying data files to his storage device. "Volcanic activity, industrial pollution, natural chemical reactions in the atmosphere. Humans have been dealing with acidic precipitation for thousands of years." The aliens looked at each other in disbelief. Nelora's bioarmor chose that moment to fail completely in one section, exposing part of her arm to the acidic air. She quickly moved to shelter behind HFY's failing shield. "You are saying your homeworld regularly produces environmental conditions similar to Keth 7? Wispwind asked in his weakening voice. "Not similar," Jake corrected. "In some places worse. Ever heard of Venus?" The data transfer continued while Jake explained. "Venus is a planet in our solar system. Surface temperature hot enough to melt lead, atmospheric pressure that would crush most life forms, and it rains sulfuric acid." He gestured to his armor. "We've been visiting Venus for over 200 years. Every piece of human space equipment has to work in Venus's atmosphere or it doesn't get approved for use." Unit 847's processors work to analyze this information. "You are suggesting that human protective equipment is designed for more severe conditions than most inhabited worlds?" "Not designed for," Jake said, finishing the data transfer. "Tested by. Every human tool, every piece of equipment, every survival system gets tested on Earth first. And Earth doesn't care if you have feelings." The building shook as part of the structure collapsed somewhere above them. More acid rain began pouring through new holes in the ceiling. The aliens' protection systems were all failing now, forcing them to cluster together in an increasingly small safe zone. Jake stood in the middle of the acid rain, completely unaffected, and continued his explanation. Your species developed energy shields because you could. Humans developed acid resistance because we had to. You made adaptive bioarmor because it was possible. We made equipment that works because failure meant death. He packed away his storage device and prepared to leave. You see primitive technology. I see battle-tested equipment that has survived every challenge Earth could throw at it. The mission alarm on Jake's display started flashing red. They were running out of time before the building's complete collapse. We need to go, Jake announced. The structure won't hold much longer. As they prepared to leave, HFY's shield finally failed completely. The reptilian commander found himself exposed to the acid rain for the first time. He cried out in pain as the chemicals began eating through his scales. Without hesitation, Jake moved to help. He positioned himself between HFY and the worst of the acid rain, using his own immunity to create a mobile shelter. How? HFY gasped as Jake helped him toward the exit. How does your armor resist what destroys our advanced systems? Jake smiled inside his helmet. Because it was made by a species that learned to survive on a planet that actively tries to murder its inhabitants every single day. They reached the corridor leading back to the transport. The acid rain was getting heavier as the storm intensified. The aliens' various protection systems were all failing or had already failed. Only Jake remained completely unaffected by the hostile environment. Morrison, Nelora said as they struggled through the dissolving building. When we return to our homeworlds, we will need to recalculate our assessments of human technology and human survival capabilities, Unit 847 added, its voice distorted by acid damage to its vocal systems. Jake helped guide the failing aliens through the collapsing structure. Maybe next time, before you call human equipment primitive, remember something important. They reached the exit as part of the building's roof collapsed behind them. The transport was visible through the acid storm, looking like a beacon of safety in the chemical hell of Keth 7. Remember what? HFY asked as Jake helped support him during the walk back to the ship. We call this a light drizzle compared to some places on Earth, Jake replied. And we've been working in conditions like this since before your species discovered fire. The revelation hit the alien officers like a physical blow. They had mocked human technology without understanding what it had been designed to survive. They had laughed at equipment that was built to handle environments that would destroy their most advanced systems. As they reached the transport, Jake looked back at the research station. It was collapsing now, unable to withstand the planet's constant chemical assault. But the human had walked through that same environment like it was a pleasant stroll through the park. The aliens finally understood. Humans didn't have the most advanced technology in the galaxy. They had something potentially more valuable, equipment that actually worked when everything else failed. The journey back to the transport became a race against time and failing technology. The acid storm was getting worse by the minute, turning the air into a thick soup of corrosive chemicals. Jake could barely see the ship through the heavy rain that fell like liquid fire from the dark sky above. HFY stumbled beside him, his scales showing burn marks where the acid had touched them. Without his energy shield, the reptilian commander was as vulnerable as any organic being on this hostile world. Jake kept himself positioned between HFY and the worst of the chemical downpour. I cannot believe this is happening, HFY muttered through gritted teeth. My shield technology has never failed before. There's a first time for everything, Jake replied calmly. Stay close to me. Behind them, Nelora's bioarmor had failed in several more places. The insectoid officer was leaving a trail of her own protective fluids mixed with acid burns. Her movements were becoming slower and more painful with each step. Wispwind was barely holding together. His containment field kept flickering on and off, causing parts of his gaseous form to dissolve each time it failed. He had compressed himself down to the size of a basketball, using all his remaining energy just to stay alive. Unit 847 was in the best shape among the aliens, but that wasn't saying much. The robot's metal skin was covered in acid burns that looked like someone had taken a blowtorch to its surface. Several of its sensors had completely stopped working, and its voice now came out as a series of electronic squeaks and static. Transport distance 50 meters, Unit 847 reported, its damaged voice barely understandable. Estimated arrival time, 3 minutes at current pace. We might not have 3 minutes, Jake said, looking at his failing teammates. Can anyone move faster? The answer was clearly no. The aliens were using all their remaining strength just to keep walking. Their advanced protection systems had failed them completely, leaving them as helpless as children in the acidic environment. Jake made a decision. Everyone gather around me, he ordered. As close as you can get without touching. What are you doing? Nelora asked through her damaged translator. Making a mobile safe zone, Jake replied. He positioned himself in the center of the group, using his body to block the worst of the acid rain from hitting his companions. My armor can take it, yours can't. The aliens clustered around Jake like chicks around a mother hen. The human's immunity to the acid allowed him to take the full force of the chemical assault, creating a small area of relative safety for the others. They moved as a group toward the transport, with Jake absorbing the punishment that would have killed his teammates. The acid rain that had no effect on him splashed off his armor to create a buffer zone around the failing alien officers. Why are you helping us? Zixtai asked as they walked. We mocked you. We called your equipment primitive. You were wrong, Jake said simply. That doesn't mean you deserve to die for it. 20 meters from the transport, Wispwind's containment field failed completely. His gaseous form began to dissolve rapidly in the acidic atmosphere. Jake reacted instantly, pulling out an emergency containment unit from his equipment pack and activating it around the alien's failing form. That was my emergency backup system, Jake explained as Wispwind's form stabilized inside the small force field. It's designed for toxic gas environments. More Earth survival equipment, Unit 847 observed with what might have been admiration. They reached the transport as the building they had just left finally collapsed completely. The research station crumbled into a pile of dissolved metal and concrete, unable to withstand any more chemical assault from the planet's hostile environment. Jake helped each alien through the airlock before entering himself. Once inside the pressurized safety of the ship, he removed his helmet and ran a hand through his hair. He looked completely unaffected by their walk through chemical hell. The aliens stared at him with expressions of shock, respect, and confusion. Their various injuries and equipment failures stood in stark contrast to Jake's perfect condition. Medical attention required for multiple team members. Unit 847 announced, running internal diagnostics on its damaged systems. Jake activated the ship's emergency medical systems and helped treat the aliens' acid burns. His hands were steady, and sure as he applied neutralizing compounds and bandages to chemical burns that would have killed a human in seconds. I owe you an apology, Morrison, Zixtai said as Jake treated the burns on his scales. We mocked your equipment without understanding its true nature. Apology accepted, Jake replied, applying healing gel to a particularly bad burn. But maybe next time, ask questions before making assumptions. Nelora clicked her mandibles, weakly. Perhaps we have underestimated the value of practical experience over technological advancement. Your bioarmor is incredible technology, Jake assured her while bandaging her damaged limbs. It's just not designed for this level of acid concentration. Nothing wrong with that. Unit 847 approached Jake with several of its systems still sparking from acid damage. Human Morrison, I must revise my calculations regarding human survival capabilities. Your species appears significantly more resilient than originally assessed. We're not tougher than you, Jake explained while helping the robot run system repairs. We're just used to hostile environments. Earth taught us to build things that work when everything goes wrong. The transport lifted off from Keth 7's surface, leaving the acid-soaked planet behind. Through the windows they could see the storm continuing to rage, dissolving everything it touched in an endless cycle of chemical destruction. Morrison, Wispwind said from inside his emergency containment unit. You mentioned Venus earlier. Is it truly worse than what we just experienced? Jake settled into his seat and looked out at the departing planet. Venus has surface temperatures of 900 degrees Fahrenheit, atmospheric pressure 90 times stronger than Earth normal, and clouds of concentrated sulfuric acid. The rain is so acidic it would dissolve most metals before it hit the ground. The aliens exchanged glances of disbelief. And humans work there regularly? Nelora asked. Mining operations, research stations, atmospheric processing plants? Jake confirmed. We've been doing it for over 200 years. Every piece of equipment that works on Venus works anywhere else in the galaxy. Zixthai looked at his treated wounds and then at Jake's unmarked armor. When we return to Coalition headquarters, I will be filing a report recommending that human equipment standards be adopted across all member species. And human environmental training protocols, Unit 847 added. Jake smiled and began cleaning his equipment. Just remember one thing when you write those reports. What is that? Nelora asked. Humans didn't develop this stuff to impress anyone, Jake said, wiping acid residue off his armor plates. We developed it because our planet kills anything that isn't tough enough to survive. Every day on Earth is survival training. The ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, carrying them away from the hostile world. In his report later, Jake would write that the mission was successful, and the alien officers had performed admirably under difficult conditions. He would make no mention of their initial mockery, or the fact that their advanced technology had failed where human equipment succeeded. The important thing was that they had all learned something valuable. The aliens had learned not to judge other species' technology by appearances. Jake had learned that sometimes the best way to earn respect is simply to do your job well. As the ship traveled through space toward home, Jake looked at his battle-scarred armor hanging in his quarters. It had no energy fields, no adaptive capabilities, no artificial intelligence. It was just ceramic plates and polymer seals, built to survive the worst conditions Earth could produce. And that, Jake reflected, was exactly why it worked when everything else failed. Human technology might look primitive to alien eyes, but it was tested by a planet that had been trying to kill humans for millions of years. That kind of quality control was hard to beat. The mission was complete, the data was recovered, and everyone had survived. In Jake's book, that counted as a successful day at the office. Jake Martinez pressed his face against the small window of the transport ship. Below him stretched an endless sea of red sand and jagged rocks. The desert moon looked dead and angry under the pale light of its distant sun. Jake had seen deserts before back on Earth, but nothing like this place. The transport ship hummed with nervous energy. 24 cadets from 12 different alien species sat in the cramped cargo hold. Jake could smell the metallic scent of the Krillian cadets, who looked like walking crystals. Their bodies caught the light and threw rainbow patterns on the walls. Near them sat the Nephians, fish-like beings who breathed through slits on their necks. They kept spraying water on themselves from small bottles. Jake looked at his two human companions. Lisa Parker sat across from him, her blonde hair pulled back tight. She kept reading something on a small data pad, her green eyes moving fast across the screen. Tony Blake sat next to Jake, his thick arms crossed over his chest. Tony had scars on his hands from years of outdoor work in Alaska. The three humans were the only ones of their kind on the ship. Jake had grown up in Arizona, where his grandfather taught him about desert survival. Lisa studied ocean life in Florida and knew more about plants and animals than anyone Jake had ever met. Tony had spent his whole life in the wilderness of Alaska, learning how to live when nature tried to kill you. Commander Vexitar stood at the front of the cargo hold. He was tall and thin with 4 arms and skin that looked like black leather. His eyes were huge and yellow, and when he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding metal. Jake did not like the way the commander looked at the human cadets. "Listen well," Commander Vexitar said. His words came out slow and clear through the translation device around his neck. "In 10 minutes, you will begin your final test at the Galactic Military Academy. You will be dropped on the surface of Kethmaran. This moon has no water sources that you know about. The temperature during the day reaches 47 degrees. At night, it drops to -20. Jake felt his stomach twist. 47 degrees was hot enough to kill a human in hours without water. He had learned this from his grandfather during their trips to the Sonoran Desert. The commander held up a small bag. Each cadet gets one water bottle, one emergency beacon, and one multi-tool. If you use the emergency beacon, a ship will come get you. But you will fail the test and leave the academy forever. A Krillian cadet named Zexaloth made a sound like breaking glass. Jake thought it might be laughter. How long must we survive? Zexaloth asked. 72 standard hours, the commander replied. After that time, extraction ships will land at the beacon point 30 kilometers from your drop zone. Only cadets who reach that point will become officers in the Galactic Fleet. Jake did the math in his head. 72 hours meant 3 days and 3 nights. A human could live maybe 3 days without water in normal conditions. In this heat, they would be lucky to last 1 day. Lisa leaned over to whisper in Jake's ear. "Look at their equipment," she said quietly. Jake looked around the cargo hold more carefully. The Krillian cadets seemed to have extra pouches built into their crystal bodies. The Nephians had thick belts with tubes running to their breathing slits. The Voltari, who looked like balls of blue electricity, had small metal devices attached to their energy forms. "They have extra gear," Jake whispered back. "More than that," Tony said, keeping his voice low. "Look how calm they are. The aliens know something we don't." A loud buzzer filled the cargo hold. Red lights started flashing on the walls. The ship began to shake as it entered the moon's atmosphere. "Prepare for drop," the commander announced. "The test begins the moment you touch ground." Jake checked his equipment one more time. The water bottle held maybe 2 cups of liquid. The multi-tool had a knife, pliers, and a small scanner. The emergency beacon was red and had a single button. Jake hoped he would never have to use it. The ship touched down with a hard bump. Sand and dust swirled outside the windows. The back door of the cargo hold opened with a hiss. Hot air rushed in like opening an oven door. Jake could taste the dry sand in his mouth immediately. "Go," Commander Vextar ordered. The cadets filed out of the ship onto the burning sand. Jake's boots sank into the soft ground. The heat hit him like a wall. Even through his academy uniform, he could feel the sun burning his skin. Lisa and Tony stayed close to him as they walked away from the ship. Behind them, the transport engines roared back to life. Sand and rocks flew everywhere as the ship lifted off. In seconds, it was just a dot in the pale sky. Then it was gone completely. Jake looked around at the other cadets. The Krillians were already moving across the sand like it was nothing. Their crystal feet did not sink into the ground. The Nephians had put on wide hats and long robes. The Voltari floated above the sand, not touching it at all. The human cadets stood in the middle of the desert with sweat already running down their faces. Jake's grandfather had taught him that panic killed faster than heat. He forced himself to breathe slowly and think clearly. "We need to find shade," Jake said. "And we need to move before the sun gets higher." Lisa pointed to a group of rocks, about a kilometer away. "There. We can rest and make a plan." The 3 humans started walking across the sand. Each step was hard work. The sand was soft and grabbed at their boots. The sun beat down on their heads and shoulders. Jake could already feel his water bottle getting warm against his hip. Behind them, he heard Zexaloth make that breaking glass sound again. "Perhaps the soft skins should have stayed home," the Krillian said loudly enough for everyone to hear. Jake did not look back. He knew that getting angry would waste energy and water, but deep in his mind, he made a promise. He would not let the aliens win. Somehow, he would find a way to beat this test. His grandfather had always said that humans were not the strongest or fastest creatures on Earth, but they were the smartest, and smart was what Jake planned to be. 6 hours after the drop, Jake knew they had been cheated. The alien cadets were not just surviving, they were doing well. Too well. Jake, Lisa, and Tony had found shade under a large rock formation. The temperature was still over 40 degrees, even in the shadows. All 3 humans were soaked with sweat. Their water bottles were already half empty, and they had tried to drink as little as possible. From their hiding spot, they could see the other cadets spread across the desert. The Krillians were walking around like they were on a pleasant stroll. Every few minutes one would bend down and put his hands in the sand. Then his crystal body would glow brighter. "They are eating the sand," Lisa said. Her voice was hoarse from the heat. "Look at them. The sand has minerals they can absorb." Tony wiped sweat from his face with his sleeve. "The fish people have water tanks. See those tubes going to their necks? They brought their own water supply." Jake watched a group of Voltari floating near, some tall rocks. The blue energy beings seemed to be getting brighter instead of dimmer. "Those rocks," Jake said. "There must be natural electricity in them. The Voltari are recharging themselves." It was becoming clear that each alien species had been given advantages for this desert. The Krillians could eat minerals from the sand. The Nephians had brought hidden water reserves. The Voltari could recharge from electromagnetic fields in the rocks. Only the humans had been sent out with nothing but basic supplies. Lisa pulled out her datapad and showed Jake the screen. "I have been reading about this moon. It says here that Kethmaran was terraformed 200 years ago. Parts of it were made to look like different planets. This section was designed to copy the deserts of Earth." "Earth deserts," Jake repeated. He thought about his grandfather's lessons. If this is like an Earth desert, then maybe Earth knowledge will work here. A scream echoed across the sand. Jake looked up to see another human cadet collapse about 500 meters away. It was Amy Walsh from Texas. She had been walking alone toward the beacon point when the heat finally beat her. Two other human cadets, Pete Johnson and Carlos Rivera, reached Amy first. Jake could see them trying to give her water and get her into the shade of a small rock. But Amy was not responding. Her body was completely limp. "She has heat stroke," Lisa said. "She will die if she does not get help soon." Pete Johnson stood up and pulled out his emergency beacon. The small red device beeped loudly as he pressed the button. Within minutes, a rescue ship appeared in the sky. It landed in a cloud of dust and sand. Medical personnel ran out and carried Amy to the ship. Jake watched Pete and Carlos climb aboard the rescue ship too. They had not used their own beacons, but they were leaving anyway. Jake understood. If they stayed in the desert, they would end up like Amy. The test was designed to kill humans. That left only Jake, Lisa, and Tony as the surviving human cadets. Zexaloth appeared at the edge of their rock shelter. The Krillian's crystal body sparkled in the harsh sunlight. His face was hard to read, but Jake could tell he was enjoying himself. "Only 3 soft skins left," Zexaloth said. His voice sounded like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. "Perhaps you should call for rescue before you die like your friend almost did." "We are fine," Jake said. He did not stand up because he wanted to save energy. Zexaloth made that horrible laughing sound. "Fine? Look at you. You leak water from every pore. Your skin is turning red from the sun. Your lips are cracking. You will be dead before the second day ends." "Maybe," Tony said. "But we are not dead yet." The Krillian walked closer. Jake could see that Zexaloth's crystal body was full of absorbed minerals. He glowed with health and energy. "Your species is weak," Zexaloth said. "You have no natural defenses, no special abilities, no evolutionary advantages. You are soft, meat wrapped in thin skin." Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but he pushed it down. Getting angry would make his heart beat faster and waste precious water. Instead, he looked past Zexaloth at the desert around them. The sand was not all the same. There were patches of different colors and textures. Some areas had small plants, growing tiny green things that somehow survived in this heat. Jake's grandfather had taught him that plants meant water. Even in the driest desert, plants found water somewhere. "You are right," Jake told Zexaloth. "Humans are weak compared to your kind. We cannot eat sand or store water in our bodies. We cannot float above the ground or recharge from rocks." Zexaloth's crystal face showed surprise. He had expected Jake to argue or get angry. Jake continued. "But being weak teaches you things that being strong does not. It teaches you to look for help in places where strong creatures never think to look." "What do you mean?" Zexaloth asked. Jake pointed to a cluster of barrel-shaped plants about 200 meters away. "Those cacti, they store water inside their bodies. Each one might hold several liters of clean, drinkable water." Lisa and Tony looked where Jake was pointing. They could see the thick green plants growing between two large rocks. Zexloth laughed his glass-breaking laugh. Plant water? That is your plan? Even if those plants have water, it will be full of poison and acid. Cactus water will make you sick. Maybe, Jake said. But my grandfather taught me how to get clean water from barrel cacti. He learned it from his grandfather, who learned it from the Apache people of the American Southwest. Humans have been getting water from desert plants for thousands of years. The Krillian stared at Jake for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away across the sand. Enjoy your poison water, soft skin, he called back. I will watch you die from it. After Zexaloth was gone, Lisa grabbed Jake's arm. Can you really get clean water from those plants? Yes, Jake said. But it is not easy. We have to cut them open carefully and filter the water through sand and cloth. It takes time and energy. Tony stood up and checked his equipment. How much water can we get? Jake studied the cactus cluster. There were at least 6 large barrel cacti. Each one was as tall as a man and twice as wide. If we do it right, maybe 20 or 30 liters. Enough for all 3 of us for several days. Lisa smiled for the first time since the drop. That changes everything. Yes, Jake said. But first we have to get to those plants without collapsing from heat stroke. And we have to work fast before other cadets figure out what we are doing. The 3 humans began planning their approach to the cacti. Jake felt hope growing in his chest for the first time since landing on this desert moon. Maybe humans were not as helpless as the aliens thought. Maybe being weak and soft could be an advantage if you were smart enough to use it right. His grandfather had always said that the desert did not care how strong you were. It only cared how smart you were. Jake was about to find out if that was true. The second day started with bad news. 2 more cadets had used their emergency beacons during the night, both from species that Jake had thought were well adapted to the desert. The cold had been worse than expected. Even with the rocks holding some heat from the day, the temperature had dropped to -18 degrees. Jake, Lisa, and Tony had survived the night by huddling together under a shelter they built from rocks and sand. They had shared body heat and taken turns staying awake to watch for dangers. But they were all weaker now. The heat and cold cycle was draining their strength fast. The alien cadets were still doing well. The Krillians had absorbed enough minerals to keep their bodies warm through the night. The Nephians had special thermal suits that had appeared from hidden compartments in their equipment. The Voltari had found more electromagnetic fields to feed from. We need to move now, Jake said, as the sun rose higher. Before it gets too hot to work. The 3 humans made their way across the sand toward the cactus cluster. Each step was harder than the day before. Their legs felt heavy, and their mouths were completely dry. Jake's tongue stuck to the roof of his mouth when he tried to swallow. The barrel cacti were even bigger up close than they had looked from a distance. The largest one was taller than Tony and covered with thick spines. Its green skin was waxy and tough. Jake could see why these plants survived in the desert. They were like living water tanks with armor. How do we get the water out? Lisa asked. She touched one of the smaller spines and pulled her finger back quickly. Blood appeared on her fingertip. Jake pulled out his multi-tool and opened the knife. It was small but sharp. My grandfather showed me this when I was 12, he said. You have to cut carefully. The spines are the least of our problems. The real danger is the alkaloids. What are alkaloids? Tony asked. Plant poisons, Lisa answered. Many cacti produce bitter chemicals to keep animals from eating them. If we drink water with too many alkaloids, we could get sick or even die. Jake nodded. That is why we have to be smart about this. We cannot just cut open the cactus and drink whatever comes out. We have to process the water first. Jake began by cutting away a section of spines from the side of the largest cactus. The work was slow and careful. Each spine had to be cut at its base to avoid leaving sharp points. Sweat dripped from Jake's forehead onto his hands, making the knife slippery. After 20 minutes of careful cutting, Jake had cleared a patch of green skin about the size of his hand. Now came the hard part. He had to cut into the cactus without damaging the water-holding tissue inside. Lisa, I need you to watch how the plant bleeds, Jake said. If the liquid is clear, we are cutting in the right place. If it is milky or colored, we have hit a poison sac. Jake made the first cut. Clear liquid immediately began to seep out of the wound. It looked like water but smelled green and earthy. Lisa bent down and examined it closely. It looks clean, she said. No obvious contamination. Jake continued cutting, making a square opening in the side of the cactus. More clear liquid flowed out along with soft, pulpy plant tissue. The inside of the cactus looked like a wet sponge made of green fibers. Tony, start digging a hole in the sand right here, Jake said. Make it about as deep as your hand. While Tony dug, Jake began scooping out handfuls of the pulpy cactus interior. Each handful contained a lot of water mixed with plant fibers. He squeezed the pulp over Tony's hole and clean-looking water dripped out. Lisa was already working on a second cactus. She had learned quickly by watching Jake. Her cuts were neat and careful. This one has even more water, she said. The pulp is soaking wet. But Jake was not satisfied with just extracting water. His grandfather had taught him that desert survival was about more than finding water. It was about making sure the water was safe to drink. We need to filter this, Jake said. Even if it looks clean, there could be bacteria or alkaloids that we cannot see. Jake began building a filtration system using materials from their emergency kits and the cactus itself. First, he punched holes in the bottom of his empty water bottle. Then he began layering different materials inside the bottle. The bottom layer was clean sand that he had sifted through his fingers to remove any organic matter. On top of that, he placed pieces of cloth torn from his uniform. Next came a layer of charcoal that he made by burning some of the woody cactus spines with his multi-tools fire starter. What is the charcoal for? Lisa asked. It absorbs poisons and bad tastes, Jake explained. My grandfather learned this trick from old survival manuals. Charcoal can clean water better than almost anything else. The top layer of the filter was more cloth and clean sand. When Jake poured the cactus water into the top of the bottle, it came out the bottom much clearer and cleaner looking. Tony tested the filtered water carefully. He put a small amount on his tongue and waited to see if it tasted bitter or made him feel sick. After a minute, he took a slightly larger sip. It tastes like water, he said with relief. Maybe a little green, but not bitter or burning. The 3 humans spent the rest of the morning extracting water from 6 large cacti. They filtered everything through Jake's improvised system. By noon, they had collected almost 20 liters of clean water stored in various containers they had made from cactus shells and pieces of their equipment. But the most important part was not the water itself. It was the system Jake had created. The filter could process more water whenever they needed it. They had turned a one-time resource extraction into a renewable water source. As they worked, other cadets began to notice their improved condition. The humans were no longer desperately conserving their last sips of water. They were actually drinking regularly and looked healthier than they had since the drop. A group of Voltari floated over to investigate. These energy beings communicated by changing the colors of their electrical fields. Jake could not understand their language, but their meaning was clear. They were curious and maybe worried. Zexaloth appeared again, along with 2 other Krillians. The crystal beings had been doing well by eating sand, but even they needed some water. They had been getting moisture from underground, but it was not enough for the harsh conditions. What are you doing, Softskins? Zexaloth demanded. Jake looked up from where he was processing water from the 7th cactus. Learning, he said simply. Learning what? That being weak means you have to be smart, Jake replied. And being smart means you do not just solve the problem once. You solve it in a way that keeps working. Zexaloth stared at the filtration system and the pile of cactus pulp. Jake could see the Krillian's crystal brain working, trying to understand what the humans had done. Lisa stood up and wiped her hands on her uniform. We have plenty of water now, she said to Jake. Enough for days. But Jake was already thinking ahead. He looked around the desert at the other struggling cadets. Several non-human species were starting to show signs of stress. A young Nephian had been separated from his group and was clearly suffering in the dry heat. Two Voltari were flickering weakly, their energy reserves running low. Jake made a decision that would change everything. Instead of keeping their water, advantage secret. He walked over to the dying Nephian with a container of filtered water. "Here," Jake said. "Drink this." The Nephian looked at Jake with huge, confused eyes. In his own language, he gurgled something that sounded like a question. "It is clean water," Jake said. "From the cacti, it will help you." The Nephian drank deeply. Almost immediately, his gills stopped fluttering desperately and his skin became less gray. He looked at Jake with what could only be gratitude. Lisa and Tony watched this exchange with surprise. "Jake," Lisa said quietly, "what are you doing?" "We need that water for ourselves." Jake looked back at his friends and smiled. "No," he said. "We need that filter. The water we can always make more of. And now we have something more valuable than water." "What?" Tony asked. "Allies," Jake said, "and I think we are going to need them."